He appeared in more than 100 films. He was an Oscar winner. Alongside Martin Luther King, he marched. They were brave, wise men who were familiar with their signatures on the Declaration of Independence, declared to everybody that they would die for it. However, Peter Jennings froze when Charlton Heston said something in his final interview. At the age of 77, the actor who played Moses acknowledged that, despite having his 60-year-old wife at his side, his mental faculties were failing. Filming halted because the team was so startled. To the man who had once been America's most influential voice, no one knew what to say. On October 4, 1923, Charlton Heston was born in Cook County, Illinois, as John Charles Carter. 11 days later, his birth certificate was filed, identifying him as Charlton Carter. Although he stated in his memoirs that he was born in Wilmette, the majority of official sources indicate that he was born in Evanston. Some initial uncertainty over his history resulted from the mix-up. However, it is undoubtedly true. The rare visit on Letterman, The Tonight Show, or Saturday Night Live. He was raised in the St. Helen, Michigan, woods. It was a solitary and peaceful spot. He later referred to himself as a scrawny hick from the woods and hunted and fished virtually every day. Despite the conventional narrative that he changed his name later in life, census data from 1930 already listed him as Charlton J. Carter. His parents separated when he was 10 years old in 1933. Later on, his mother wed Chester Heston. He adopted the Heston name at that point. The majority of people thought Charlton was derived from his mother's last name, although that is untrue. Marion Charlton, his grandma, gave it to him. In order to avoid their biological father, his mother and aunt acquired his last name after being adopted by their grandpa when they were little. Heston's moniker remained constant as he aged and gained notoriety. His family always referred to him as Chuck. In 1941, at the age of 17, he starred in his first movie, Peer Gynt. Considering that sound movies had been around since the late 1920s, it was odd that this one was silent. Alan, his younger brother, also had a little role. Despite not being a big production, this movie was daring. It tried to remain faithful to the original play, and used Norwegian music. Later, one critic said that it had an eerie effect because of the quiet. By that time even Charlie Chaplin had moved on from silent movies. Although it was Heston's debut film appearance, critics have referred to it as one of his least significant parts. He enrolled at Northwestern University in the same year. He met Lydia Clark at a drama class in the spring of 1941. He worked hard hours, and was impoverished and introverted. He worked every job he could find during the day, and operated elevators at night. Despite everything, he still saw Lydia. They instantly fell in love. They were married in Greensboro, North Carolina, on March 17, 1944. He passed away in 2008, yet they remained together for 64 years. Fraser Clark, Heston, and Holly Heston Rochelle were the two children they reared. Their relationship remained solid, despite being separated by film assignments. After 9 years of marriage, Heston once claimed to be more in love than he was on his wedding day. His debut on Suspense on March 15, 1949, marked the beginning of his television career. He made his Studio One debut on June 15, 1949. A few months later, he had the opportunity to perform complicated characters in that show. On December 12, 1949, he portrayed Edward Rochester in Jane Eyre. On October 30, 1950, he played Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. Additionally, on October 22, 1951, he performed in Macbeth. He developed in these jobs. Compared to other shows, Studio One received nicer sets and more funding from the CBS crew. At first, Heston appeared rigid to some. Others, however, took note of his presence and commanding speech. He was distinctive. The show was receiving around 500 scripts a week by 1955. Heston was developing into a genuine performer. You assume that's true when Bette Davis says it. However, I believe that I earned this honor by performing tasks that many others also perform. However, They take my photo when I perform them since I'm an actor. He engaged on 2 significant projects in 1950. He portrayed Mark Antony in a low-budget cinematic adaptation of Julius Caesar. In that Chicago performance, he was the sole paid actor. David Bradley, an old acquaintance from his boyhood, directed it. Dark City was his big Hollywood debut. He portrayed Danny Haley, a resentful gambler who operated an illicit bookmaker's shop. Heston was 25 years old. Despite the film's lackluster reception, director Cecil B. DeMille was impressed. DeMille cast him in the world's biggest show in 1952. Heston portrayed Brad Braden, a stern circus boss who had a secret tenderness. He gave a Bogart-like harshness to the character according to critics. The movie took home the Best Picture Oscar. It demonstrated that Heston could be the star of a big-budget movie. He starred in 2 adventure movies in 1954. The Naked Jungle was the first. He portrayed Christopher Leiningen, a plantation owner battling a tight marriage and an army ant infestation. For the ant sequences, director Byron Haskin produced innovative effects. The film's daring depiction of sexual tension between Heston and co-star Eleanor Parker was praised by critics. Heston then took a plane to Peru to film Secret of the Incas. It was the first major Hollywood production to use Machu Picchu for filming. The 16-person team collaborated with 500 local extras. He portrayed treasure hunter Harry Steele, who is searching for a misplaced relic. Indiana Jones was later influenced by that position. Peruvian tourism also increased as a result of the movie. DeMille started casting for the 10 Commandments later in 1954. He first desired Hopalong Cassidy actor William Boyd. Boyd declined since he worked in television. DeMille then turned to face Rock Hudson, Kirk Douglas, Dan Daly and Jeff Chandler. The pivotal moment occurred when the Israeli government gave DeMille a sculpture of Michelangelo's Moses. He saw how much the statue resembled Heston. That influenced his ultimate decision. He was unsure even at that time. Despite the fact that Heston was not very beautiful and had a menacing vibe, DeMille offered him the role according to his journal. One more surprise was in store. Fraser, Heston's kid, had recently been born. Henry Wilcoxon, the producer, proposed that he play infant Moses in the scene with the basket. His age was just 3 months. DeMille concurred. In the sequences with the burning bush, Heston ended up portraying both Moses and the voice of God. He was more than merely an actor by 1956. He was now one of the most influential characters on television and the face of biblical epics. Ben-Hur was already slated to be the largest and priciest movie Hollywood had ever produced when MGM began preparing it in the late 1950s. However, the quest for the ideal actor for the starring part became convoluted and time-consuming. Their initial pick wasn't Charlton Heston. On the list, he was not even close to the top. Burt Lancaster was initially offered the role by the studio. He declined it. The script, in his opinion, was dull and even hostile to Christianity. After that, they visited Paul Newman. He had recently acted in the unsuccessful biblical movie The Silver Chalice in 1954. It still made Newman feel ashamed, and he didn't want to do it again. He also made a joke about not having the legs to dress like a Roman. Marlon Brando died too. The studio persisted in their efforts. Although several at MGM questioned Rock Hudson's ability to play the part, they still looked at him. Leslie Nielsen, who at the time was a serious actor and not yet well known for humor, was even considered for the role at one point. Nothing was successful. In their desperation, MGM began considering Italian performers who could not even speak English. Director William Wyler looked to Charlton Heston at that point. In 1956, Heston had previously portrayed Moses in the 10 Commandments. The voice was his. He was present. He also had the appearance of someone who could steer a Roman chariot. It was a huge production. $1 million was spent on the chariot race alone. Filming lasted 3 months and 5 weeks. Over 200 kilometers of real track were traversed throughout the event. As soon as Heston got to Rome, he began training. He spent 3 hours a day practicing chariot driving. He needed to get used to the twists and the horses. He used special contact lenses to shield his eyes from the dirt that would shoot up into his face. An actual collision resulted in one of the race's most well-known moments. The renowned stunt coordinator Yakima Canute was the father of stuntman Joe Canute. Joe was launched into the air on one leap and hit hard. Despite suffering a chin injury, he lived. In the finished movie, Wyler used that actual footage. Close-ups of Heston getting back into the chariot were used to piece it together. That shot became one of the film's most recognizable scenes. 78 trained horses imported from Sicily and Yugoslavia were employed in the production. The other teams utilized Lipizans, while Heston's squad used Andalusians. Ben-Hur made a sensation when it was released in 1959. It took home 11 Oscars at the 32nd Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Heston. That established a record that stood for over 40 years until the Titanic broke it in 1997. Heston would never again win an Oscar in a competitive race. However, everything changed with this one performance. He thereafter became the preferred actor in Hollywood for historical epics. He was dubbed the emblem of a period when Hollywood produced serious movies with serious heroes by critics. Heston had the authority to choose his own projects after Ben-Hur. He performed El Cid in 1961. In The Agony and the Ecstasy, he portrayed Michelangelo in 1965. He portrayed John the Baptist in The Greatest Story Ever Told that same year. According to Roger Ebert, Heston produced at least 3 movies that practically everyone has seen at some point: Planet of the Apes, The Ten Commandments, and Ben-Hur. However, despite all of this success, Heston made some unexpected decisions. Let's Make Love, a major studio movie starring Marilyn Monroe, was rejected by him in 1960. He headed to Broadway instead. He desired to collaborate with Laurence Olivier, who was directing Ben Benbois-Livy's play The Tumbler. The play had a difficult beginning when it debuted in Boston. After only 5 shows, it relocated to New York and shut down in February 1960. It was described as horribly pompous by Time magazine. It failed miserably, but it was worth it, Heston remarked. In 6 weeks he learnt more from Olivier than he could have studied on his own, he told journalist Joe Hyams. He and Gary Cooper created The Wreck of the Mary Dear later that year. It was a marine thriller that was adapted from a Hammond Innes book. Halfway through, the tale changed from a mystery to a courtroom drama. The change in tone was not well received by critics. The weakest aspect, according to one critic, was the conclusion. The movie was nevertheless profitable. According to MGM figures, it made $1.65 million abroad and $1.165 million in the US and Canada. It made a modest $200,000 profit on a $2.6 million investment. However, it fell short of the studio's expectations. Heston subsequently claimed that the novel's impact was not adequately conveyed in the script. He also attributed the courtroom scene's poor quality to director Michael Anderson. Heston made a comeback to epics with El Cid in 1961. The film, which was shot in Spain over 9 months, gained notoriety for its off-camera events. Sophia Lawrence, Heston's co-star, and Heston seldom get along. The industry knew they hated one another. Behind the scenes they were often fighting, despite their remarkable on-screen connection. Heston resisted when producer Samuel Bronston attempted to put them together once more in The Fall of the Roman Empire. For Bronston, that choice led to issues. Some people think it contributed to his studio's financial demise. Patriots are always the first to hear the appeal for freedom when it trembles in the icy shadow of real danger. El Cid was a huge success at the box office. The outfits were authentic, the weapons were authentic, even the Spanish troops participated as extras. Bronston amassed a wealth and used it to finance other epics. However, Heston started to feel confined. He had portrayed Moses. He had portrayed Ben-Hur. He was now portraying another historical figure. He was concerned that he would be permanently confined to these positions. With the release of Planet of the Apes in 1968, Charlton Heston's career underwent a dramatic swing. It altered the appearance and feel of science fiction. The makeup on the apes was quite difficult. Applying it took up to 7 hours, and taking it off took 3 hours. Actors would thus have to report for duty at 2 in the morning and work until 10 at night. John Chambers, a makeup artist, used unique paint that didn't clog pores and foam rubber that allowed skin to breathe to remedy the issue. The first day of filming was May 21, 1967. The studio claimed to have spent $1 million on cosmetics, while in reality, it spent $345,000. It was difficult to shoot. In the scorching desert, the performers donned complete prosthetics. To keep their makeup intact, they sipped liquid meals with straws. They unintentionally categorized themselves by monkey species off-camera. Orangutans sat with orangutans, and gorillas sat with other gorillas. To capture the astronauts sliding down hills, cinematographer Leon Shamroy constructed a metal sled. At the same time, Heston was the subject of false allegations in a satirical essay. It claimed that in May 1967, he brought a stagehand out for drinks and made offensive remarks to her. It even made fun of the fact that she had dreams about Heston dressed as an ape. It was a work of fiction. By mimicking the format of actual news, it made fun of cancel culture. Heston featured in The Omega Man in 1971. Richard Matheson's I Am Legend served as its inspiration. After the world was decimated by a virus, Heston portrayed a guy by alone. In the US and Canada, the film brought in $4 million. Matheson claimed he didn't care because it was so distant from his work. It developed become a cult favorite over time. Known as his desert island pick, Tim Burton claimed that it was the first movie he had ever seen, with amusing action sequences. Then, in 1973, came Soylent Green. It took place in 2022 in a 40 million person, polluted New York. Due to overpopulation and the greenhouse effect, the Earth was collapsing. One of the earliest movies to discuss climate change was this one. It was based on Harry Harrison's 1966 book Make Room. However, the novel did not have the human element that Soylent Green is known for. That was inserted by screenwriter Stanley Greenberg. Harrison detested it. Green filters were utilized by cinematographer Richard Klein to give the movie a poisonous, sickly appearance. Heston starred in Earthquake in 1974. The most stunt performers at the time, 141, were utilized in the movie. Even at 50, Heston continued to do many of his own stunts to simulate actual earthquakes. The camera system shook the whole picture. 6-ton chunks of concrete were inches from stunt workers. At a flood scene, one was rendered unconscious. An elevator accident injured another. Heston directed Antony and Cleopatra in 1972. The project was a dream. He requested that Orson Welles direct, but when Welles declined, he took over. Reviewers detested the movie. The naval combat seemed cheesy and featured Ben-Hur's repurposed images. Heston ignored pace and granted himself extended close-ups. The movie flopped and never came back. Charlton Heston wasn't always the conservative figure that most people associate with him. He was a devoted Democrat in the 1950s. In 1956, he backed Adlai Stevenson in his first presidential campaign against Dwight Eisenhower. Heston continued to compete, but Stevenson lost. In 1960, he supported John F. Kennedy and rejoiced over his victory. Heston evolved from a supporter to more than that by the early 1960s. He really did something about it. When most performers remained mute, he entered the civil rights movement. Heston and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. marched in Washington on August 28, 1963. He was not a background figure. The arts group that day was led by him. There were about 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of the National Rifle Association. Mr. Charlton Heston is your first vice president. Later on, Heston declared it to be the most significant event in the civil rights struggle. March, in his opinion, aided in getting the Civil Rights Act passed by Congress the following year. Given that Heston had portrayed Moses in the Ten Commandments only 7 years prior, his description of Dr. King as a Moses of the 20th century struck a deep chord. Even though he was aware that his actions would harm his career, he persisted. I marched for civil rights alongside Dr. King in 1963, long before Hollywood thought it was appropriate. He once said, he thought that for democracy to be effective, people had to stand up for it. According to him, You must believe in democracy's operation if you support it. Heston's opinions, however, were not static. He demanded tougher gun regulations following the 1968 assassinations of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. He said that Congress needed more regulations on rifles, shotguns, and pistols because they weren't doing enough. However, he evolved throughout time. His opinions began to change in 1972 while he was filming The Omega Man. He had joined the NRA by the late 1990s. He became a member of the NRA board in 1997. He was elected president in 1998. He held the position till 2003. The number of NRA members surpassed 4 million under his presidency. He took the stage at the NRA conference in Charlotte in 2000. A gun was placed over his head. "From my icy, lifeless palms," he said the now famous words. It was a pivotal event. At a time when Democrats were retreating from that discussion, Heston emerged as the spokesperson for the gun rights movement. That change in Second Amendment support, in his opinion, was almost a promise come true. He viewed it as a win for individual liberty. He delivered a stirring address at Harvard Law School in 1999. February 16th was the date. There were several people in the room. Heston informed the students that they belonged to the generation that had been politically silent in America since the beginning of the revolution. He said that their quiet was an indication of dread. He discussed how, during marches in the 1960s, individuals used labels like black and Negro. However, those identical terms were now prohibited in speech. "I don't want to write a book right now," he added. "The last one I sold was recently completed. I'm going to do a movie now," I said. He told me the title after saying no. "Oh, you got me," I said. Yes. He saw this as an indication that free speech was no longer permitted. He won the cultural battle by calling the speech. He cautioned that it is easier to tell individuals what to do once they have been instructed what to say. Like Dr. King, he urged the students to fight against such pressure. He argued that non-violent protest was still important. Then an unexpected time arrived. Heston disclosed in August 2000 that he had gone to treatment earlier that year. He stayed at a center in Utah from late May to mid-June. His age was 76. Years ago, he told the National Enquirer, he had stopped drinking whiskey, but had taken to consuming excessive amounts of white wine. He drank at dinner parties and on airplanes. He said he wasn't stumbling or slurring, but he was aware that it had gotten out of hand. Lisa DiMatteo, his spokeswoman, said that his schedule contributed to the problem. He was running for office for George W. Bush, leading the National Rifle Association, and presenting the play Love Letters with his wife Lydia. Heston said that he was deeply affected by the negative criticism he received from London critics following his performance in the West End. However, his kid and wife were the ones who ultimately persuaded him to seek assistance. On March 17, 1944, Charlton and Lydia tied the knot in Greensboro, North Carolina. He was on his way with the Air Corps to the Aleutian Islands. The marriage would endure 2 weeks, according to her father. 64 years passed at the time. There were problems in their relationship. He frequently traveled for events and movie shoots. He claimed that being apart from her made him realize how isolating life can be. They were not at all alike. Despite his lack of organization, he was always on time. She was highly tidy and frequently late. There were rumors of fighting and cheating. Heston denied everything. Since he was 17, he claimed to have adored Lydia. He had no desire to jeopardize their marriage. They acquired fighting skills. One of their rules was to never sleep before resolving a dispute. During hip surgery in 1998, surgeons made a discovery. Heston had cancer of the prostate. He was 73. Although the diagnosis was unexpected, it was made early. It wasn't life-threatening, he claimed. But he had a decision to make. In order to complete shooting and back Republican candidates in the 1998 election, he postponed therapy. Then he started therapy. Every day of the week, he was exposed to radiation. He came to treatment every morning at 7 a.m. He then started working. He was working with Diane Keaton and Warren Beatty on the movie Town and Country at the time. He didn't even pause. He declared himself cancer-free in 2001. Charlton Heston sat by himself on screen on August 9, 2002. He spoke steadily. His gaze was fixed. The actor who portrayed Moses and Ben-Hur at the age of 77 disclosed something far more intimate than any part. "I'm exercising a privilege that was bestowed upon me by the wise old white men who founded this nation. Alzheimer's disease-like signs have been identified in him." Just 2 days prior, on August 7th, the video message had been filmed in a private setting without any journalists or crowds. Later, Lisa Powers, his spokesman, clarified the reason. He wanted the words to be just so. From beginning to end, he wanted to speak them himself. It had a simple backdrop. It had a tight frame. Heston's influence remained strong. This time, however, there was simply the truth, neither a script nor an audience. "I wanted to prepare a few words for you now, because when the time comes, I might not be able to," he stated, looking directly into the camera. Then he added something much more piercing. "Losing his audience is the biggest loss an actor can experience. It is impossible for me to part with you, yet I can part the Red Sea." He didn't duck what was about to happen. Rather, he confronted it directly. Heston refused to leave public life right away, in spite of the diagnosis. He said that he will remain the National Rifle Association's president until April 2003. As long as he could, he intended to continue speaking at political gatherings. And as a final act of performance from a man who had centered his life on the stage, he recited words from Shakespeare's The Tempest from memory before concluding the message. He delivered what would be his last broadcast interview in December 2002, just 4 months later. He sat with Peter Jennings of ABC at his house. His wife of almost 60 years, Lydia, remained at his side. Heston was already a different person. He talked more slowly. He occasionally lost his words. He repeated himself sometimes. He was still conscious of what was going on though. Heston didn't hesitate to answer Jennings' questions regarding his sickness. His concern, he explained, was not only forgetting, but also losing the ability to say goodbye. He made his diagnosis public for that reason. "I never wanted to get to the point where I couldn't share that part of my life," he added. "I won't keep you out of this phase of my life, because I can separate the Red Sea, but I can't part with you." Support was overwhelming after the news. Nancy Reagan was among the first to make the call. She didn't approach Charlton to talk. She desired to talk to Lydia. She was aware from personal experience that Alzheimer's disease affected more than simply the individual who was afflicted. For those who looked after them, it also changed everything. For more than 5 years, Charlton Heston had Alzheimer's. He passed away at home in Beverly Hills on April 5, 2008. He was 84. The disease's consequences were the official reason. He had been quiet for a while by then. However, the homages were boisterous and brimming with admiration. Heston was described as a man of integrity and character with a huge heart by President George W. Bush, who had given him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2003. He brought up Heston's involvement in the civil rights struggle, his leadership in the Screen Actors Guild, his service during World War II, and his tenacious advocacy of the Second Amendment. Nancy Reagan expressed her heartbreak. In real life, not only on TV, she referred to him as a hero. He had always been there for her spouse, she said. When Heston resigned from the NRA in 2003, Florida Governor Jeb Bush made a very noteworthy statement to him. "It's safe to say that my brother might not have been President of the United States if it weren't for your active involvement," he remarked. Heston's political effect during the 2000 election was summed up in that one statement. The Episcopal parish of St. Matthew's in Pacific Palisades, where he had been a member since the early 1980s, hosted his funeral on April 12, 2008. There were around 250 persons present. It was an assembly of political leaders and movie stars. Nancy Reagan arrived. Arnold Schwarzenegger did too. Christian Bale, Oliver Stone, Olivia de Havilland, and Tom Selleck. Heston was cremated following the event. The family he had cherished and guarded for 64 years received his ashes back.